In 1980, the median home price in the United States was $62,000. Today, that number has skyrocketed to $420,000. It's not just housing though. Tuition, healthcare, groceries, and lots more have shot up in cost, while income is still somehow stuck multiple decades in the past. You see, Gen Z, the generation that I'm a part of, is playing a financial game that boomers never had to. It begs the question, how on earth did we get here? To understand just how stacked the deck has become, we need to rewind a good 40 years to understand how boomers built wealth in a system that simply doesn't exist anymore. You see, because boomers often chalk it all up to inflation, but just how true is that really? The housing costs we've mentioned so far aren't really relevant unless we take a look at income across those time periods. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has the United States median household salary for full-time workers at $82,000. What was income like back in 1980 though? In 1980, the median family income was $21,000. On the surface, it might not sound like a lot, it might actually sound like inflation has done us a favor. But if we look further, we can actually see that the house to income ratio for most boomers was around 2.9. As in, if you managed to save your household income for 2.9 years, the gross amount would be equivalent to the price of most homes within the United States. In 2025, that ratio is now 5.1. Almost double what it was like in the peak home buying years for boomers. But it only gets worse if we start looking at some of the most populated cities within the country. Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies published research within 2022 that showed that the home to income ratio within New York City was 7.1, Miami's was 8.7, and San Francisco's was at 11.3. That would basically imply that the median income within San Francisco would never allow you to fully own a home within today's market. And that's not just for purchasing a home. The same exact trend happened with rental costs too. Now, can someone please tell me why this is all happening? Oh wait, I'm that someone. Well, how did we get here? Why is housing so much more expensive now than it was for previous generations? There's actually three main causes. The first big reason, after the 2008 house market crash, many builders went out of business, and those that remained became super cautious about overbuilding. The US, as a result, has been underbuilding by millions of homes over the past almost 2 decades, especially when it comes to starter homes. That means there have been more and more buyers chasing fewer homes, which pushes the prices up. The second reason is that many cities in the United States have zoning laws that favor single-family homes. More specifically, 75% of residential land in many US cities is zoned exclusively for single-family homes. This then limits the development of higher density housing options like condos and apartments, causing further restrictions on the supply of housing options. The last reason, and the one that most people have the biggest problem with, is institutional investors, also referred to as Wall Street investment firms. They want your home, your neighbor's home, and they started buying up homes after 2008 and turning them into rental properties. On top of that is the fact that they often outbid families with total equity cash offers. So imagine you find your dream first home and you save the 20% down payment you thought you needed to make a great offer. In today's market, that means saving $84,000. Well, imagine you're about to make that offer and in comes the sneaky investment firm that comes under you and puts an offer on the entire price of the home entirely within cash. That's basically what's been happening. One common fact that people like to throw out on these investment firms is that they only own 2% of the rental market within the United States, so they must not be making that much of an impact. While that's true, that's not even close to the case for some of the more populated cities within the country. For example, in Charlotte, North Carolina, institutional investors own 18% of the single-family rental market. In Jacksonville, Florida, it's 21%. And in Atlanta, Georgia, they own a quarter of the entire market. So yeah, it's not just your imagination. The housing game has completely changed. But what about other expenses? Well, what people don't want you to know about expenses is that they actually might fall back down and become affordable again the moment you hit the like button on this video. In all seriousness though, guys, I produce these entirely myself, and so if you'd like to see more videos like this and content around how to make the most out of the bad hand many of us have been dealt, then hit that subscribe button as it helps me out a ton, and I'd love to help you out in return. Now back to expenses. New vehicles in 1980 averaged to $7,600, making a new car back then only 36% of the median household income. In 2025, the average new car is $46,000. That number is absurd and makes a new car 56% of the median household income. Healthcare in 1980 averaged to $1,067, making it 5% of the median household income. In 2025, US healthcare is about to reach $16,000 per person, or 20% of the median household income, which is going to make it the highest cost per person out of anywhere in the entire history of the world. But if our healthcare has the highest cost on the planet, do we at least get the best of the best care? When comparing the United States to 9 of our peer countries, the Commonwealth Fund analysis found that the United States was in last or second to last place in 4 of the 5 categories that rank healthcare performance, overall making it the most expensive yet one of the lowest performing healthcare systems within first world countries. Are you feeling how bad it's gotten yet? Now keep in mind, the oldest someone from Gen Z can be in 2025 is 28 years old, which means that if this trend keeps continuing, then these ratios are only going to get worse. And there is one cost category that has a dark history and no end in sight, and that is the outrageous cost to go to college. Do I think college is entirely a scam? That's a topic for another video. Either way, if you wanted to attend an in-state university back in 1980, it would have cost you a 4-year tuition of approximately $10,200. When including the cost of room and board, the total expense to go to college in 1980 was around $24,000. Today, the 4-year cost to attend an in-state public university is $119,000. If we looked at out-of-state tuition, that number would skyrocket to $200,000, but we'll exclude that for our comparison. Okay, so it costs a lot more, but what do we get for that cost to go to college? Well, you get an average starting income today of $68,700. On the surface, that looks exceedingly better than the average starting salary of $18,550 of college graduates within 1980. But when you compare that to the total expense for college in 2025, you end up making a starting salary worth 58% of the entire expense to go to college. In 1980, the starting salary would have gotten you 77% of the entire expense to go to college. And we're not even considering the fact that most companies in today's job market prefer you to have a master's. And for that master's, you're going to want to shell out another $61,000 for a 2-year public university program. Oh, and let's not forget the fact that it's exceedingly more difficult to get into the top universities in the country today than it was back in 1980. Given all the vast differences in the cost to go to college today, it's created an enormous discrepancy in the amount of student loans needed to accommodate that gap in expenses. You see, in 1980, student loans were only used by 26% of the total population of college attendees, and it averaged to around $2,000 for most college grads. That number is now over doubled, with 53% of college graduates having student loans. Among public universities, the average loans for college graduates within 2025 was $27,100. Now, how is it possible that we're getting lower income from our degrees and more student debt, which then causes us to have less money for the already more expensive homes, vehicles, and healthcare? Well, the truth that many people don't talk about is that the student debt crisis and the college expense nightmare all began in the 1980s. Before then, public universities were mostly funded by the states. 70% of their operating budgets were funded by taxpayer dollars. Students just had to make up the difference, which literally could just be covered by a part-time job. But starting in the 80s, states began offloading more of the costs. Well, why is that? It was kind of a mix of economic downturns, tax cuts, and changes in political priorities. Schools had to figure out a way to make up for the shortfall in revenue and still offer the same services as before. So how did they do that? Well, they kept bumping tuition up. As states began to spend less, colleges had no choice but to shift the cost onto students. Now, while colleges had to raise tuition, the federal government did something sneaky that pushed us to exactly where we are today. See, back in 1980, the primary form of federal aid was actually Pell Grants. Pell Grants are a form of aid that the federal government offers for moderate to lower income individuals, and in 1970, they covered 70% of the cost to go to college. At the beginning of the 1980s, the federal government started shifting away from Pell Grants and started pushing the idea of student loans. So much so that Pell Grants today are more difficult to get, and even when you do get them, they now only cover 30% of the cost to go to college. Loans, because of this, became the default. And that, you see, created a never-ending cycle. Colleges bump up tuition, and then this increases the reliance on student loans. Since more students are borrowing, colleges don't feel any of the financial pressure to keep tuition low, because they're getting the revenue in regardless, which further justifies more tuition hikes. Understanding how we got here confirms what so many of us have felt, that Gen Z really is at a disadvantage in ways other generations weren't. Some of the main things that are in our control are developing great spending and investing habits and figuring out how to grow your income consistently. The biggest advantage that Gen Z has, though, is quick access to information early on in our lives that otherwise wasn't available to generations prior to ours. Information around how to make the most out of what's in your control, which is exactly what I plan to provide on this channel. And remember, if a boomer ever tries to tell you that you're just making excuses, tell them to go